And welcome back to The Dawn Show. My special guest, Dr. Robert Melillo, author of the book, Autism, The Scientific Truth About Preventing, Diagnosing, and Treating Autism Spectrum Disorder, and what parents can do now. And this is such a great book, Dr. Rob. And I should mention you also are the author of Disconnected Kids and Reconnected Kids.
Correct.
So you've been doing this obviously a long time.
Yeah.
And we'll meet your wife Carolyn later in the show.
Right.
But the two of you have 3 kids. So
Yes.
you're a parent. You know what it is. Your kids are in college, but you know what it is to worry about
Absolutely.
kids.
That's really what drew me to this. It was one of the first children I worked with was an autistic child who wasn't speaking. His name was Daniel. Remember him. Have a letter from his mother. And I remember the parents came to see me and they had just been told that they needed to look for an institution, and they were crying. And they asked me if I could help their son. And I said, I didn't know, because I didn't have a lot of experience working with children that were that severe. Started working with them in 3 weeks. The mother came in crying one day, and I said, uh-oh, what happened? And she told me that he started to speak spontaneously. And she had written a letter to Newsday, the local newspaper. She had mass cards for me, and the other children were hugging me. And I thought to myself that if I did this, I don't know if I did this or is this just a coincidence, but if I did this, this is what I would spend the rest of my life, because they were the same age as me, her kids were the same age as my children, and the ability to relieve that amount of pain on parents was just unbelievable to me.
Well, what do you think about, in other words, you have the Jenny McCarthy's who come out and say, oh, this is absolutely the vaccines. And there's so much misinformation out there, controversy out there,
Yes.
that I think whether they're wrong, right, whatever, it just adds to that pain and does not add to solutions and answers.
Yeah, well, that's why, my approach is unique and Brain Balance's approach is unique, because we're the first organization really to come out and say, this is what's actually happening. This is what the problem is. Nobody else is really dealing with the core problem. They're looking at different symptoms. So you can do some different nutrition issues, or you can look at something and say, well, it's an immune problem, or you can look at it and say that there's all these other issues, and this is some of our children from our center here.
So brain balance, in other words, what is teaching kids balance or working with them physically? How does that reconnect their brain or help them with ADHD or Asperger's or autism?
Well, the problem is that there is a developmental imbalance that happens. The right brain and the left brain develop at different times. The right brain develops in the womb and for the first 2 to 3 years, then the left brain for the next 3 years, and then the right brain, left brain. So if something happens, some environmental factor slows down their brain development during a particular window, then that causes an imbalance, and especially if they're gifted in certain areas of the brain, as almost all these children are. So you take ADHD or autism, for instance. It's a right brain developmental delay. It really starts for the most part in the womb, and these children are exceptionally gifted in the left side of their brain. They're brilliant, and as their parents often are. And so what we see is this imbalance in developmental delay in the right brain means that certain areas, and it's different in each child, in their right brain are going to be immature. So that the right brain is the social, the attentional side of the brain, the social part of the brain, the part of the brain that controls nonverbal communication, that reads people's emotions, that has eye contact, that controls their gross motor movement, and that regulates their immune system in a certain way. So what we see is that by targeting the weaknesses, the areas of the brain on that right side that are weak, and we do exercises, physical exercises, mental exercises, we do academic training, as well as do diet and nutrition, we can stimulate those areas of the brain and bring that up to balance it out and match the other side. And when we do that, we're able to get them to form what we call functional connections, and now they can use the whole brain. And that effectively reverses the problem, because that is the problem.
So without drugs and all the medication, if parents can come to a brain balance center, they can actually work on this, and you have patients who then you can't tell the difference. They're no longer ADD, or is that?
Right, we have students because we're learning centers, but the fact is that, and so therefore we don't do anything medical or treatment-wise. And what we see is medications don't work. I mean, there's two major studies that came out this year. One, the largest study ever done on 14,000 children, called the MTA study, that had been going on for 10 years. And essentially it showed that medication worked for about a year and a half at reducing symptoms. And then after that, there was no long-term benefit whatsoever. And in fact, the children that were medicated generally did worse. There was a study in Canada looking at 11 children, over 11 years, 4,000 children. And they looked at boys that were medicated and found that they did worse academically. So we know medication doesn't work on a long-term basis. There's no difference between children that were and weren't medicated. So it's not the answer. It may help reduce symptoms, but it's not the answer. And you know, so we are targeting the problem, and we're actually getting to the root cause.
Let's talk more about the answers with Dr. Rob when we come right back.
Here come speak.
Right.
I'm learning to understand my reading when I come here because I read this chapter book and I actually understand it.